And so I was asked to represent the American Embassy. So my contribution was to stand on stage and recite the Emma Lazarus poem from the Statue of Liberty. And they made me this beautiful handbook, which you might see at weddings. You might see it at family celebrations of the harvest, sometimes at Lunar New Year. And to my great surprise, and I thought it was wonderful, I went back in October to visit, and I found out that at some of the places in Seoul where, for instance, the palaces or the area with traditional houses, that if you wear a hanbok, and you can rent one while you're there, and the men can also rent traditional clothing, that you have free entrance. So it's a lovely way of promoting the heritage, and it was really very colorful, and I thought it was wonderful. So I'm going to start my talk talking about, and please tell me, I think this is a good level, if everyone can hear me in the back row. I'm going to start with the flag of Korea, which is the Taegukgi in Korean, and which they refer to as their supreme ultimate flag. It has a background of white, which is the traditional color for peace and purity. And in the middle, it has kind of a yin-yang representation of the cosmic forces of the universe, the red being positive forces, and the blue meaning negative forces. And then the trigrams around the edge all represent different fundamental principles of movement and harmony and refer to nature or family or things like that. So my talk is about Korea. It's South Korea. It's the Republic of Korea. Every once in a while I get the question, did I live in the South or the North? You may or may not know that we are not allowed as U.S. citizens to live in the North, and it's not advisable to travel there because we have no diplomatic representation with the North, and there's no one to help you if things go wrong. And things can go wrong if you remember this tragic story of Otto Warmbier, the university student, which is still fairly recent. The Land of the Morning Calm, the nickname, came about two different theories. In 1895, there was a British painter working in Korea, and he wrote a book about Korea and Joseon. Joseon was the name of the dynasty that ruled Korea from 1392 until 1895. And Joseon means morning brightness, morning freshness. So he gave Korea the nickname the Land of the Morning Calm, but he did not mean it in a complimentary way. He thought it was very lacking in vitality as a society, so he meant Land of the Morning Calm sarcastically. However, it's also been attributed to an emperor of the Ming Dynasty, the Celestial Empire of the East, and also Joseon, meaning morning freshness, and referring to just the really striking natural beauty that Korea has, the high jagged mountains and the tranquil clear waters and very peaceful, harmonious, especially in the morning. So the nickname Land of the Morning Calm has stuck over the years. So I'm going to start out with a little bit of geography, and we're looking at right up here at Korea, which North Korea borders China. You've got Russia coming down right there. You've got very, very close proximity Japan. And you have this, which says the Sea of Japan, which actually I shouldn't have there because this is a very touchy issue in Korea. For Koreans, it's the East Sea, and for Japanese, it's the Sea of Japan. And unfortunately, there are not good relations between the two countries. I do have a friend in Seoul who's the principal of the German school right now, and he had a website redone last summer to show people where the school was, and he wasn't really paying attention. And the Ministry of Education came calling and said that the man who had worked on his website, who was from Spain, had used a map that said Sea of Japan. So I really have to rectify that. It's a very touchy issue. But basically, I just wanted to show how far north it is on the map of Asia. This is Korea in 1945. So you've got the end of the Second World War, and we already knew that the Cold War was starting. Harry Truman had a terrible time in Potsdam negotiating with Stalin, trying to get Poland, and he never did succeed. And so even though the Soviets had been our allies, we knew that things were not going to continue in that fashion. So we had to think of something to do. Our troops were still 600 to 700 miles away on Okinawa, and the Russians were much, much closer. So there were two colonels, Charles Bonesteel and Dean Rusk becoming later the Secretary of State for President John F. Kennedy, who were tasked with finding a solution. And no one really ever thought of dividing the peninsula because Korea had enjoyed a really high degree of continuity for a millennium or more. There had never been any issues, but they had to make a proposal. And they wanted to look at something along provincial boundaries, but they didn't have a map. They knew that they wanted to have the capital, which is right here, Seoul, in the half of the peninsula where our influence, the United States, would have influence. So they just almost out of a hat proposed the 38th parallel. And this is what happened. Korea was divided along the 38th parallel, and they were very surprised. The Russians said yes right away. There was no debate, there were no questions, and there was the 38th parallel. So this is what it looked like in 1945, and everyone really thought that the division would be temporary. No one had any inkling of what the future was to bring. So this is what, and I won't touch for a long time on the Korean War, which has also been known as the Forgotten War in the United States, but basically on June the 25th, 1950, the South was completely surprised when the North Korean People's Army, supported by Soviet tanks, invaded and managed to push, if this is the 38th parallel, push all the way down here. The second largest city in South Korea is Busan, or Busan, can be spelled with a B or a P. And so this was known as the Busan perimeter. So it was a surprise, it was a big shock. And this was June 25th, 1950. And this is what Korea looks like now. Afterwards, at the end of the war was 3 years long. It cost us about 37,000 American lives and 1 million South Korean lives. And there was never a peace treaty signed. The South Koreans refused to sign a peace treaty because they did not accept the division of the peninsula, which is why we still have an armistice. So as you can see, it's not exactly the 38th parallel anymore. It curves up. About 56% of the land is in North Korea, and that's today's border. This is another map. You can see again how it actually, South Korea stretches up above the 38th parallel. You can see how close Seoul, the capital, is to the border. You can see Incheon. We'll see more of Incheon in a minute, which is where if you were to fly and land at a major international airport, you would be landing in Incheon. You can see over here Pyeongchang, where the 2018 Winter Olympics were held. And Pyeongchang and Munich were the two final contenders for these Olympics. Each of them, interestingly enough, had an ice skating champion representing them and doing the almost ambassadorial tasks. I don't know if any of you remember back a young East German woman named Katharina Witt, who used to skate and won many, many gold medals. And then in 2010 Kim Yuna from South Korea in Vancouver did the same thing. She accumulated quite a number of medals, but Pyeongchang ended up beating Munich out, and there were a lot of jokes at the time that people would confuse Pyeongchang with Pyongyang, which is the capital of North Korea, but that was obviously in name only. Again, Busan, the second largest city here, and this map has mentions a ferry sinking, a tragic incident, which just happens to be on the map. And Jeju Island down here, which is a volcanic island, belongs to Korea, also a tropical atmosphere, and also known sometimes in jest as the Hawaii of Korea. And before Korea became so affluent, it was also a very traditional honeymoon destination for young Koreans. Now they really have quite a bit more to choose from financially. And you can see over here, Sea of Japan, East Sea in parentheses. So just a tribute to our armed forces. On the peninsula, we have about 25,000. We have the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. And the largest contingent was over here in Yongsan, right in the middle of Seoul. Yongsan means Dragon Mountain. This is where my family and I spent 4 years because it was kind of an unusual situation for diplomats, but all of the U.S. Embassy, except for the ambassador and the number 2, were housed on the Army post. So we literally met the U.S. Army in Korea and Asia at the same time. So it was very interesting 4 years for many reasons. However, Yongsan is being moved south. This has taken almost 20 years to Camp Humphreys down here. You'll see why in just a moment. Osan Air Base, if we had VIP visitors from the U.S. government or the military, that's where they would land, and then they would helicopter up to Yongsan or to the different areas. The U.S. Forces Korea are also responsible for, if we were to have a non-combatant evacuation exercise, meaning that if you're in Korea as a U.S. citizen or certain other countries and you're registered with the U.S. Embassy and there were any kind of an emergency where you had to get out fast, the U.S. Forces Korea has regular exercises. And actually, the first year that we were there, they advertised in the embassy newsletter of anybody who wanted to take part. And I thought this would be really interesting to go off to an island somewhere and experience this. But we had 3 children and I just couldn't leave. But with so many posts, depending on if you're in a country where there might be something that you have to leave, we all had you have to have your passports together and medications and any important papers and then pet documents if you have a pet and everything literally ready. I mean, it's not like you live on the edge of the sword, but you should be ready to go if you had to go within a half an hour time and have everything together. So this is a salute to the forces in Korea. And this is the way the border looks today. And I'd like to emphasize that it's not just a border. It's not a single line. It's actually an area. And it's called the DMZ, Demilitarized Zone. And it's 160 miles wide and about 2 miles, or long and 2 miles wide. And this is just the way it was left at the end of the war. It's heavily mined now. Some people suggest that if the 2 countries were, regardless of whether or not they ever reunify, but if they were ever free, that the DMZ should be kept as a national park because there are examples of flora and fauna in this area that aren't seen anywhere else on the peninsula, literally been hardly touched since 1953. You'd have to take the mines out, but still, it's very interesting. So let's think about this. There are, and this, by the way, Panmunjom is a peace village here. If you have negotiations, there was sometime in the last year or 18 months, a picture of the South Korean President Moon Jae-in meeting Kim Jong-un of North Korea there. That would have been at Panmunjom. So a lot of things go on at the DMZ that we've never heard about in the last 50, 60 years. For instance, there's a village on each side of the DMZ. On the South Korean side, it's a working village. The people are South Korean citizens. However, because of their proximity to the border, they don't pay taxes and they don't have to serve in the military. All the young Korean men serve 2 years in the military. On the north, there's also a village, and it's painted bright blue from the south, but upon closer examination with a telescope, it was revealed that it's a sham. Nobody lives there. It's just made to look like a village, like somebody's living there. And they actually have a skeleton crew of people who sweep the streets and keep up the facade. So you've got the 2 villages. Then you've got the flagpole wars. I believe sometime in the 1970s, South Korea put up a flagpole 323 feet tall. North Korea responded with 525 feet tall. And so you've got those 2 flagpoles there. Then you've had over the last 50, 60 years, you've had loudspeaker campaigns broadcasting propaganda across the DMZ. In fact, even as recently as 2016, I was reading when North Korea did some rocket tests, the South put up a very new high-tech audio system that apparently is supposed to reach across the DMZ. Of course, most of the people who hear this are the soldiers who are stationed there. There is also the balloon warfare. Both sides have sent balloon propaganda across, hoping that the winds will carry to the other side to convince people of, whatever political persuasion you're trying to do. There have been 4 tunnels that have been dug from the DMZ going south towards Seoul, all leading in the direction of Seoul. The first one was discovered in 1974. These are tunnels that were dug by North Korea. North Korea claims it was mining for coal, but there's no coal in those tunnels. And each tunnel grew more sophisticated with time. So in other words, I think the last one that they found was sloping more slightly upward so that water would run down. And you can move a whole contingent or a battalion, however many of men with weapons through these tunnels. All 4 were discovered before anything happened, but it was very clear that it was aiming at an invasion of Seoul. Then you have 2 more modern things going on. You have hacking of cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, hacking groups that have been traced to North Korea that have hacked into South Korea. And then you have North Korea is very, very good at counterfeiting money. They have counterfeited many $1 bills, and now I don't know about the success of this since 2013. We have that new $100 bill with Benjamin Franklin, that big Benjamin Franklin on it, but prior to that, they were well known for making something called a super dollar, meaning that it looked even more authentic than the original, so they do quite a bit of counterfeiting. So all these things go on that we don't necessarily hear about, and one really tragic happening was the sinking of the battleship Chonan, which happened just as we were getting ready to leave Korea in March of 2010. This was a battleship that had about 140 South Korean sailors on it. It was not in North Korean territorial waters. It may have been close, but it was not in them. And it was sunk by a torpedo, and I think it was about 42 sailors who perished in this. The conclusion by about 8 countries was that it was a torpedo shot by a North Korean submarine that sank the ship, and South Korea immediately slapped up some more sanctions on the North. But really, there's not a whole lot that they can do when these things happen. So this was Chonan, and this was the current president at the time, Lee Myung-bak. I have to say that in Korea, the last name goes first. So I mentioned President Moon Jae-in had been shaking the hand of Kim Jong-un. So those are, Kim is the last name, Moon is the last name, and Lee Myung-bak, this would be President Lee. Lee would be his last name. And here he is at a memorial service with the pictures of the sailors, and Navy Chief vows revenge for Chonan. But again, there's not really much that South Korea can do when these things happen. So this is Panmunjom, as I mentioned, the peace village up there. We are facing towards North Korea. These blue buildings would be where negotiations would be held, if any were to be held. You can take a tour up there. The tours up to the border are very popular. I wasn't planning on touring when I went up there, but the U.S. Embassy tour did not run when I was there in October because of this horrible sickness of African swine flu that is sweeping across certain countries, and apparently has claimed half of China, and I don't know how many North Korean swine. North Korea won't give out any statistics, but there have been, the North Korean side of the DMZ is not as firmly cemented or prohibited as the South, and the South had found 1 or 2 boar that were infected with the African swine flu. So this is just in October. Anyway, they were very concerned, so this particular tour didn't go. But this is a popular tour that you can take, and I should mention when I talked about the 4 tunnels, that on the tours you can go part way down into one of the tunnels and get a look at what was done there. These would be the soldiers. These are South Korean soldiers inside the hut, and you're told not to go anywhere near them. Don't try to ask them if you can have a picture taken with them. Don't try to make friends. They're there to do a job, and they're not going to take to that very, very kindly. So, and this is because we do have some U.S. troops. This would be without family up at the DMZ. This is the world's most dangerous golf course. As featured in Sports Illustrated, there's one hole, and it's a par 3, 192 yards, and I think it says extreme danger. Danger, do not retrieve balls from the rough, live minefields. So this is also something that you see. So it's a putting exercise, maybe just some recreation for the soldiers who are up there. So you'd see that also on the tour. Okay, so you're flying to South Korea. You're landing at Incheon Airport, which is an incredibly modern airport. In world airport rankings, it's always right up at the top. I looked them up, and actually Changi in Singapore for the last 7 years has been #1. Changi must really be something. I read where they have 2 24-hour movie theaters and a rooftop swimming pool. So if you fly to Korea, you might just want to spend a day in the airport. I mean, if you fly to Singapore, you might want to spend a day in the airport before you do anything. But in 2018, Incheon came in second, and Narita in Tokyo came in third. And then in 2019, those two positions were reversed. So Tokyo had #2 and Seoul had #3. But this is Incheon Airport. And Incheon didn't always look like that. Incheon is on the coast, and I had told you that on June the 25th, 1950 was the invasion from the north to start the war. But on September 19th, what did we have? We had an amphibious assault led by our General Douglas MacArthur at Incheon. We had 16 countries led by the United States, and we had about 75,000 troops and 261 vessels who landed on shore and who exercised chromite was the name. Here's Douglas MacArthur there with his field glasses, and they were successful in retaking Seoul as the capital and pushing back towards that Busan perimeter, but the war raged on for another 3 years. So Incheon, but today modern, snazzy. When we were there in 2009, this is a little strip of newspaper from the Stars and Stripes that I had cut out. They recreated the Incheon landing to commemorate in thanks to the 16 countries who helped them during the war, but also in a show because they know that North Korea is always watching, so a show of military power. So recreating. And September 15th is not a national public holiday, but it is a day of commemoration for the Incheon landing. This would be terminal number 4 in Incheon that was opened for the Olympic Games, the Winter Olympics in February 2018. So you can see it's a pretty snazzy place. And so we're landing there, and we're introducing you now to Seoul. Seoul, Korea has 10 million inhabitants, but Greater Seoul metropolitan area has 25 million inhabitants. Can you imagine, 25 million? The whole country has about 50 million, so 50% of the population is right here. This is the Han River, and this would be the north side of the river and the south side of the river. And actually, I believe up until the 1980s, this would have all still been rice fields over here, but incredibly rapid growth. The rapid growth over the last 40, 50 years for South Korea is sometimes called the Miracle on the Han, referring to the Han River, or also a Cinderella story, because the per capita income in the 1960s was about $100, and as I understand it now, it's about $20,000 per capita. So quite a difference. Korea is about the world's 13th largest economy, and the United States, 7th largest trading partner. So we lived on this army post, and you can see normally this is what Seoul looks like with the dense population and the apartment buildings. But this was the army post here, and this is the army post which is being moved further south. Because why would you ever really have an army post in the middle of a capital city? You couldn't ever maneuver if you needed to. Well, way back in 1885, Seoul did not look like it does today. And it was a Chinese army outpost. And Seoul was growing and growing. And in 1910, when Japan annexed Korea, it became a Japanese army outpost. You can still see the cherry trees that the Japanese planted along the ceremonial military routes. And then, of course, in 1945, when Japan had to surrender to the United States, it became an American army post. But meanwhile, Seoul had been growing and growing and growing, and that's why you've got this beautiful little spot of green. I mean, it was everything there. There's the driving range, and there's the sport fields. This is just outside of the army post. It's the National Museum of Korea, and it wasn't built when we lived there, but it is now. When I went back, there's another museum right here, which it talks about the Korean language, Hangul. You'll hear more about that just in a moment. But so I wanted to pay tribute to Seoul. Most people in Seoul are hoping that it stays a park for the people. The developers are kind of like vultures, just hanging over everything. It's prime real estate, you can imagine. But I hope that for the people also that it stays a park. We'll see what happens. This would be the gates where we pass through. So we literally pass through, 10 million people with this rush of traffic and paying in won. WON is the currency in South Korea. And we would come onto the army post with US dollars and with the military police and with like 25 or 30 miles an hour. So it was really an interesting difference going back and forth. I had done this in Germany too, but in Germany it wasn't as dramatic a difference, partly because the army posts were out in the country and very pastoral. And this is just right splat in the middle of the city and so different, just the driving method and everything, but really, really fascinating. So, and this is a tribute, obviously, this is not a political speech, but when we do have, this is probably the highest VIP you could get from the United States. In this case, it was President Barack Obama. And then you always have a meet and greet with the military. And then separately from that, you always have a meet and greet with the embassy people. Not only the president, it can be the Secretary of State, it can be other high-ranking officials, but it's just a real, it's obviously a morale booster for everybody when somebody visits like that. So we're going to take a Seoul City bus tour. If you've been abroad, many, many cities have these hop-on, hop-off bus tours where you buy a ticket for 12 or 24 hours, and you can literally get off at attractions and get back on them. And it's a great way to have an overview. There are usually headphones in 12 or 15 different languages. And we are heading for this structure right here, which happens to be National Treasure number 1. This is National Treasure number 1. The Koreans, they number their national treasures. This was started in 1938, actually, during the Japanese occupation when they wanted to number the treasures of the Chosen dynasty. I have to say a word about the Japanese colonization of Korea. It was unfortunately a very cruel colonization. It was a total suppression of Korea heritage and culture. It was economic and environmental exploitation of the peninsula, meaning that if something was produced, it went first for the benefit of Japan and secondarily Korea. Even their language was repressed. But I am thinking that they probably wanted to number the treasures just to see what they had in this colony. So a national treasure has to be something tangible. It has to be a treasure, a site, a building, or an artifact that has significant cultural or historic or artistic value. And this particular one is one of the 8 gates of the city of Seoul, Namdaemun. It's also called Sungye-mun, which I understand to be the gate of exalted ceremonies. There were 8 gates around the capital. Again, the Chosen dynasty founded in 1392, so this would have been built around 1400, and it's the 2-tier pagoda style. The base would be stone, the top would be wood. The walls around the city were probably around 11 miles and 20 feet high. And then this was, again, one of the 3 gates for ceremonies. So it would have been A, to control access to the capital city, B, to welcome foreign dignitaries, and C, to keep out Siberian tigers. Well, there aren't any more Siberian tigers on the peninsula, but back then there were. So National Treasure number 1. And here you see it. I like this picture because it's shown at night, and you can just see all those lanes of traffic just streaming by it. So when my friend taught me how to drive in Seoul, she said, always stay in the middle lane because then you can't be shot off to the right or left and just theoretically be lost for hours. So in 2006, people were just starting to have GPS, and most of us didn't have GPS in our cars. And 2 of the countries or cities in which I've lived, I could never find any street signs, so it was all driving by landmarks. But this is the Namdaemun Gate at night, and here it is again during the daytime. It's right at the heart of the city, and this would have been in 1950. This is before war broke out. We had an American Navy ship, the USS Boxer, stop and pay at port of call, and they're saying, welcome, U.S. Navy. And just look here, so the horse and the cart and the dress and the bicycle. This would have been 1950 in Seoul. And then in 2008, disaster struck. The roof caught on fire, and the firefighters thought that they had succeeded in putting it out, but the fire started up again after midnight, and the roof burned completely. And to make it even worse, it was arson. They determined it was arson. It was a man who was about 67 years old. Apparently, he claimed that he was very unhappy. He had sold some land to developers and didn't like the price that he had received. Now, maybe it was a case of the government forcing him to sell the land. I don't know. But he had previously, 2 years previously, tried to set fire to part of one of the palaces also. So this was a national disaster. Korea is a relatively safe country. No one had ever dreamed of needing guards here or any kind of protection, but that probably has changed. They have rebuilt it, and as of 2013, it's back to its old glory. But this was just a huge catastrophe. So next to the Namdaemun Gate, oh, by the way, I should say that this gate I had mentioned the city walls, and around 1900 they started to tear down the city walls just because there was more movement with transportation. And then when the Crown Prince came, they tore down a significant section of the walls near the gate. He was deemed, the Crown Prince of Japan, too exalted to pass through the gate. And it was another slap in the face of the Korean people, so he went around the gate when he visited. So the market next to the gate is downtown. It's one of Seoul's big markets. There are several. It's almost a 24-hour market. It goes probably till about 9 or 10, and then it's open again from 11 to 4, so practically 24 hours a day. It probably started out in the 1400s as a government-controlled marketplace where the people had to bring tributes of rice, tributes of cloth or money, and then over time traders set up their stands, and they would have had fruits or fish or grains or miscellaneous goods, and then slowly but surely it evolved into this big marketplace, which is a great tourist attraction. There's no room for motor. I mean, there is, but there are no motor vehicles allowed inside. So you can walk. I mean, obviously there will be motor scooters making deliveries, things like that. But this is the Namdaemun Market, and these are souvenir wallets or purses, and then you've got millions of hats or millions of shoes. And here you've got souvenir items, you've got masks, we'll talk about them later, and souvenir dolls, and just rows and rows and rows, and not only here, but in other areas also. And you wonder how each of these stores makes a living, but they do, and they just keep on thriving. And then you've got food areas over here. You can choose your food and take it with you, or they will cook it for you right there. And they have the metal chopsticks, and you can eat right there. And it's a good variety. So this is the marketplace, Namdaemun Market. So we've left Namdaemun Market. It's off in this area here, and we're going up the main street in Seoul, Jongno or Jongro, and there's some kind of a festival going on right here. Our American Embassy is just right about here, and up here is another museum I discovered in October, which hadn't been built when I lived there, which is the Museum of Contemporary History. But what we are looking at is this palace. This would have been the largest of the 5 palaces of the Chosun dynasty. The palace is called Gyeongbokgung, which translated means palace greatly blessed by heaven. Unfortunately, in history, the palace hasn't really been greatly blessed by heaven. It was burned down by the Japanese in an invasion in about 1592 and lay in ashes for 300 years. Then when it was rebuilt, came the Japanese colonization, and Japan, and there are about 400 buildings in that palace, and Japan tore down about 400 of them, almost all of them, on the pretext of holding an exhibition which was never held. So again, it was just another stab at the culture of the Korean people. This is the gate right here, and I want you to look at this gate. This is Gwanghwamun Gate, and now I want you to look at the next picture. By the way, the gate here, Gwanghwamun, means may the light of enlightenment blanket the world. So this was the hopes of the Chosun dynasty as they were founded and went forward. May the light of enlightenment blanket the world. So in this next picture, this is the gate, how it looks today, by the way. It's very pretty, and it's got these two mythological creatures, the Haiti here, who are supposed to protect the palace from fire. So this is Gwanghwamun Gate. I should mention that I have to give the internet credit. You can see that I didn't take all these pictures myself. So that's very important, to give the internet credit. So this next picture here, you have to know that Gwanghwamun Gate was taken down during the Japanese colonial occupation. And it was taken down because of this building here. This was the Governor General's building, which the Japanese built in Kaito, which was their name for Seoul. And it was there that they ruled the peninsula. When Japan lost in 1945, this was where the U.S. military would have received the surrender of Japan. And after that, it was used as a national assembly. It was used as the National Museum before the other building was built. Perhaps one or two presidents might have taken the oath of office on the steps. But this was, so this would not have been here. They had taken this down. And again, this would have been right in front of what had been the palace. Again, to push down the spirit of the people. But there was a great debate about this building. There are two other buildings built in this colonial style that still exist in Seoul. One is City Hall and one is the Central Train Station. But this particular building came under the subject of debate. And some Koreans said, look, we're a modern country now. What does it matter about the past? Let's keep the building. Where others said, no, this is a sign of what we went through when we were, ruled by Japan, and so that side won out. So in 1995, which would have been the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II, on August 15th, which is the Korean Liberation Day that they celebrate, they started taking down this building, and you can see a model of it in a museum now, but it does not exist anymore, the Governor General's building. And there you see another one of the little Haiti on the other side, the mythological creature. So we would be going into the palace now, but I'm going to divert for just a moment and call your attention to this mountain peak here. This is Bukhansan, san meaning mountain, and in 1983, the Bukhansan Park became Korea's 15th national park, and half of it is in the city of Seoul. So, in fact, half of the entrances to the park or the subway stations are in the city of Seoul, making it one of the most visited national parks in the world, approximately 5 million people per year passing through this park. I probably wouldn't ever go that far, but that's quite a view and quite an angle, and just shows you the proximity of the park. And it really is stunning. I had mentioned at the beginning Chaozi and morning freshness with those peaks. North Korea, like North America, has that flaming red color in the autumn, and just very, very, very picturesque. The Koreans like to hike. Here you've got a row of them. Probably on, by the way, on the weekend, some of the trails have had to be closed just because of the large numbers of people going there. It's also very popular for bird watching. So this is Bukhansan. This is the national park. But back to the palace again. If we, so this would be heading towards the palace now, and all 400 buildings have been rebuilt, and you can tour the palace. And again, this is the largest. There were 5 altogether for the Chosen dynasty. And I like this picture with the illumination at night. This would be Gwanghwamun, the gate. May the light of enlightenment blanket the world. And this would be Gwangbokgung, palace greatly blessed by heaven. So at the end of that main street. So, and this would be just a scene from one of the gardens. And this is the throne room. The floor, all the floors are up off the ground, so the heating would have come from the floor. And even now, most Korean apartments have a floor heating, which is really, really nice. And this would have been the emperor's throne right there. So we've come down. You can see the mountain in the background, and you can see the palace, and we're coming down that main route, and we come to this statue, which was erected in 2009, and this is King Sejong, who ruled approximately from 1418 to 1450, more or less. He reinforced Confucian law, and he advanced scientific technology, and he did a lot for the good of his people. But what he's most well known for is he created the Korean alphabet called Hangul, because up until that time, it was a Chinese alphabet, and the aristocrats and the Yangban, or the educated class, could read and write. So Sejong decided with some of his advisors that he was going to create an alphabet for the people. There was a lot of resistance when he did this because the Yangban, the aristocrats, really didn't want everybody to read and write. They had that privilege for themselves. But over time, Hangul caught on, and there's a small museum underground under this statue here. And also, I had mentioned next to the army post, they have built a whole new museum completely dedicated to Hangul, the language. They're very, very proud of their language. Every October 9th, it had always been acknowledged as Hangul Day, but as of about 3 or 4 years ago, it's now a national holiday. So Hangul Day is October the 9th. Everybody has it off. And I'm told that North Korea also honors the alphabet, but they celebrate sometime in January. I'm not sure about that. But this would be King Sejong. This would be a picture of him with his advisors. This would be typical for the Chosen dynasty, the garb and the hats that his advisors are wearing there. So King Sejong, national or a legend in Korean history. If we come a little bit further down that same route, we're going to see this gentleman up on the top here, and he is an admiral who fought in the Incheon Wars against the Japanese. He lived about 100 years after Sejong did. He never had any formal training as a naval officer, but he never lost a battle, and many people compared him to with the likes of Admiral Nelson as being one of the greatest naval commanders ever. He was apparently very astute at studying the tides and the tides around the peninsula and using them to his advantage and taking inventory of the granaries and the soldiers and trying to resupply what was needed. But what he's really best known for is this. So can you see this? This is called the turtle ship. And you have to remember that in those days people are shooting bows and arrows at each other. So the turtle ship protected the sailors in it because it was covered like the shell of a turtle. So Admiral Yi Sun-sin, and here he is on one of the Wan notes, and here you can see the turtle ship very clearly there. It literally has the head of a turtle and almost the body of a turtle. And here could be a scene depicted where he's conferring with his advisors and the battle is raging out here, and there is a turtle ship here somewhere. I think it's maybe right. Well, forgive me, I can't see it from this angle, but there's a turtle ship out there. So Yi Sun-sin is another hero for the Koreans. So this is a very, very popular destination if you visit Seoul. It's called the N. N is in north. I thought it was north, but it turns out to be New Seoul Tower. New because they renovated it. And this is at cherry blossom time. It was originally and still is a radio and TV communications tower. And it's the second highest point in Seoul, probably after Bukhansan. And there's an observatory up there. There's a cafe, and there's a souvenir shop. And since 2008, there's even a teddy bear museum. And this is an illumination at night, probably for some festival. And this would be, I know this isn't only unique to Seoul, Korea, but have you seen maybe on some bridges in other countries around the world, locks of love, where you can go and you can declare your love and you can put these locks on with a little message. Oh, really? You have one in Rochester. How about that? You have locks of love. Oh, I didn't know that. All right, thank you. Right. Declarations of affection, right. So this would be the teddy bear museum where the teddy bears have old historic costumes on, and they're awfully cute. And then here they would be partaking in a tea ceremony, which was very formal and had very definitive rules about where you place the teacups and how you pour the tea and how you hold your hand. And so that's the Teddy Bear Museum. You could visit, if you want, just on the outskirts of Seoul, the Folk Village, which would be a little bit like Greenfield Village or Williamsburg, to see the buildings from the past. You would see these they look like wooden totem poles, but they're called jangsung, and they were there to, notice they have very large ears. They were there to hear the wishes of the villagers, the prayers, for, no famine, good harvest, no enemies. Maybe my son should marry a nice girl to marry. And the villagers would bring tributes of rice and put them at the feet of the Jangsung. So this is a group of them. Usually they would stand at the edge of the villages, the Jangsung. This is one thing that you might see there. Or you might be able to watch a traditional wedding ceremony. Again, going back in the past. So this is the Blue House. This is where the president of Korea lives. Korea has a president and a prime minister. Prime minister is ceremonial. President has the power. This is not Bukhansan. This is a different mountain. But the Blue House is known for its beautiful blue tiled roofs and just being up against all that greenery. And this would be a ceremonial, perhaps arrival of a VIP, of a head of state, where the president would be standing there and the red carpet would be rolled out. This Blue House was the scene of an attack in 1968. It was not successful. At that time, the DMZ was not so heavily mined and inaccessible as it is now. And there were some South Korean woodcutters, and they reported seeing soldiers on patrol while they were North Koreans dressed like South Koreans. And to make a long story short, there was a skirmish. It was not successful, but you have to know that at this time, okay, that was 1968, so you have to know that in 1961, there was a military coup in South Korea, and this man, Park Chung-hee, came to power, and that would have been 61, and then in 72, he declared martial law, and it was a very strict authoritarian rule, also over personal and civil liberties in the country. He went crazy in 1968 with this attack and didn't strike back. Apparently he went up into the mountain with some friends and some alcohol, but he used it as an excuse to clamp down on civil liberties even further. He survived 2 assassination attempts, but in 1979, he was assassinated by someone who was supposedly his friend, the then South Korean head of the CIA at a safe house in Seoul. So he passed away in 1979. His legacy is very controversial because he did a lot for the country, bringing it into modernization. He has a museum and a library that opened, I think, in 2012 or 2013, but he's controversial because of the really, really repressive measures against the population at that time. So what did I say? I said that his library and museum opened either 2012 or 2012. And 1 year later, his daughter, this is Park Geun-hye, ran and successfully became the president of Korea. She ran on her father's legacy of the Conservative Party. Unfortunately, she was convicted of influence peddling, and she is serving a prison sentence out in Seoul now. So as of 2016 or 17, the whole thing started. She went to trial, and she's in prison now. And the current president of Korea, so she's the Conservative Party, and the current president, just for the record, Moon Jae-in, is of the Liberal Party. So that was really a sad ending to her. She really had everything going for her, but she chose the wrong path. So when would you might want to visit Korea? I had mentioned the cherry trees on the Yongsan Army Post. You might want to go at cherry blossom time. They're absolutely gorgeous. Of course, they start in the south with Jeju Island and then work their way up north successively up the peninsula. And I just thought this was really cute, this picture of this couple with these umbrellas holding, the white blossoms. And then this looks like they've got the little umbrellas set down here, and the people parading here. And so cherry blossom time is just gorgeous. You could go for Buddha's birthday, which is always in May. It is about 1,200 years old and the largest lantern festival in the world, and has been cited by TripAdvisor as being one of the festivals that you must attend at some point. It's just a lot of fun and beautiful to watch these lantern parades through the streets. This is a lotus blossom because the Buddhism, as I understand, believes the lotus blossom is a symbol that we all possess the potential to become enlightened. And for statistical purposes, about 56% of South Koreans say that they practice no religion at all. And then of the remaining, it would be about 20% Protestant, 15% Buddhist, and 8% Catholic. The missionaries did their work in the 1900s. Korea entered the 20th century with Christianity firmly in place. And actually, at the end of the Korean War, about 1 million Christians supposedly fled to the south before the borders closed. So this is the Lantern Parade, Buddha's birthday, and just very, very festive. And this would be one of the temples in the middle of town, which has been decorated. And then you can even make your own lantern if you want to, or just stand by and watch. But this would be a sound and light festival. And then the country has a lot of different festivals. So some of them are, this is the Garden of the Morning Calm, which is actually outside of Seoul, but which has very interesting illumination right there. This is the Mud Festival in Boryong, where you just can get down and get dirty and love it. You know it's got to be in the summertime from the clothing the people are wearing. You can go to the Butterfly Festival in the town of Hampyeong. So I just chose to highlight a couple of them here. You can go to the Tomato Festival, which has been continuing for quite some years, and which also is another festival where you just... you just have to let loose. So it's not everybody's cup of tea, but hey, I mean, some people might really get into that. So that's the Tomato Festival. That's about an hour and a half, I think, northeast of Seoul. And then you've got the Mask Festival in Andong. So the mask, way back when, was looked at as something very sacred in the village, and it was kept far from the people's houses. It was also a way to wear something and to pray to the gods. Again, a little bit like the Jangsung, for things that are good or bad, evil that might befall you. And the masks all had different significances, white, red, yellow, depending upon whether the wearer was older or younger or male or female. And this mask festival is, there they've got, it looks like maybe people might have made their own masks there. But here are some dancers, and all the dances, of course, have significant meanings. A lot of the masks in Korea aren't really that attractive. You kind of tend to have a hook nose and sort of a big mouth, but that was just the way it was. And this would have been a way where, for instance, villagers could have been putting on a dance for the aristocrat or the educated, but they were safe. For instance, say they wanted to protest or ask for different conditions or something like that, they could do it anonymously, of course, behind a mask. And so the mask's a big part of the heritage and the culture. And here you can see an example. This one really here. Look at the features of the face. But those are the Korean masks. So then we come to the food. Maybe some of you have been in, I know northern Detroit is reputed to have a couple. I know I'm more familiar with the ones in Ann Arbor just because of the student population there. But the Korean food has traditionally hundreds of little side dishes along with the main dish, all of which are supposedly good for you. So you can pick and choose. And it's just fascinating, be it. Well, I'll go through some of the specialties, and then you can see. So I just put this in because this was my mom, and so one of the things I really liked to do there, which existed at the time I was there through the American Women's Club, is we would go on trips. They were called Hello Friends, and 5 or 6 women would go off to an elementary school somewhere in South Korea, and we would speak English to the children. Naturally, if the children are at kindergarten or first grade, you're just going to do the head, shoulders, knees, and toes, or the hokey pokey. But up to 5th grade, they could already speak a little bit. And then we would do some touring and have a great lunch. We always had an interpreter. And then we came back to Seoul. It was wonderful. And I took my mom with me on 2 of these trips. And actually, they were fascinated by her silver hair there. So there she is deciding what she's going to choose next. And here I am on one of my trips. So this would be our interpreters. So there were 4 women. And look at the number of the dishes on the table. This is for 5 people. And And it's just fascinating. It's just everything from things that you recognize to things that you would never recognize at all. But obviously there's the kimchi. The kimchi is the fermented cabbage. And I went on 2 kimchi making expeditions. The ladies of the embassy were invited, and we were told that once you've taken the elongated, I think we call it Chinese cabbage, and you've put the pepper paste on, you kind of cradle it in your arm like a baby, and you flip those cabbage leaves over. And depending upon the country, I mean the part of the country close to the sea, I mean, all of Korea is close to the sea, but really close to the sea, you could get the paprika paste with little bits of seafood, or if you're in an area where there's a lot of garlic grown, there might be garlic in the paste also. So this is kimchi. I didn't care for it when I moved there, but I think it's an acquired taste, and now I really like it. This is japchae, which are the transparent noodles with the vegetables and the sesame seeds. That's a very innocent, easy way for foreigners to start trying the Korean food. Bibimbap, bap means rice, and bibim means mix. So you literally have these items, and you don't have to have the meat. You can make it vegetarian. You've got a raw egg, and this stone pot, this bowl is supposed to be very, very hot. So you take your rice and you literally mix it up with everything, bibimbap, mixed rice, and then you can throw in a healthy dose of hot sauce if that's to your liking. This is the pajun, the Korean pancake. This one has some long green onions in it, and this is a very good street food in Korea. This is the dokbogi. This is a rice cake, and I'm told that the quality depends upon the sauce and the spiciness that you use. And kimbap, which is, of course, almost kind of like a sushi, the seaweed. Again, bap meaning rice, and kim, I believe, is the seaweed. And then, you lay out the seaweed and you've got the rice and you roll everything up. So an American kid could take a peanut butter and jelly sandwich to school. A Korean kid could open up his or her little box and have the little kimbap in there, which is a nice lunch. And bulgogi, which literally means fire meat, which is the popular Korean barbecue that we also see in the United States. So, and this is someone at the market fixing her wares for the day, and lots of fascinating market scenes, just endless array of foods. And I'm there with my daughter, who was she was young when we moved there. We're trying to decide what we should eat. And this is something we never tried. This is these were sold in the marketplaces, and they were in little Dixie cups with toothpicks, and they're very, very rich in protein, but we could just never get ourselves to try. We didn't care for, well, we just didn't do it. So I guess there's always something that you're going to try or not going to try in any given country where you travel. Okay. You could go to the fish market, the Norwegian fish market, which is 24 hours. You could get there at 3 or 4 in time for the daily auction. I never quite got there at 3 or 4 a.m., but it's a fascinating place to take people. There are 2 floors. Here we are looking down from the above floor. On the upper floor, there are restaurants, so you can literally buy a fish and take it up there to a restaurant. And the same as the market, they'll fix it for you right there, and you can have it to eat. This would be dried fish. It looks very ceremonial, possibly for a festive occasion with the yellow ribbons. And then this would be the squid that is so popular there. And this picture looks like this little guy is just hanging on for dear life, but pretty soon he'll be so steamed that he'll just have to let go. And sometimes I hesitate to show this because it really is a very modern country, and then you think, oh my gosh, squid. But it's something different, and it's something interesting for foreigners. They do serve it with sesame seed oil because otherwise, as I understand it, the suction cups could get stuck in your throat, and you don't want that to happen. I did try it. This is our daughter Caroline. We were out with someone who took us out, and we really couldn't say no in that sense. So she's trying a tiny little bit of the squid there, being very, very brave. So, but anyway, lots of fun to try to do the different foods. These are my 3 children, and I threw this in here only because I don't know if some of you are familiar with Flat Stanley. Flat Stanley is a series of books that started in the 60s, and the idea was to help American kids learn about geography. So as I understand it, the Flat Stanley started because the author's son had a bulletin board hanging over his bed and said to his dad, "What would happen if this bulletin board ever fell on me, Dad? I would be flat." And so the author took that idea and he created Flat Stanley, this little guy, but because he's flat, he fits through mailboxes. So classrooms in the US will assign a Flat Stanley, and you can send him to another state or another country, and then the recipient is probably a friend or a relative of yours and sends it back to you with all kinds of information. So these are my 3 children at that time, and here's Caroline. She had this handbook here. So we had a request from Austin, Texas, and we had a Flat Stanley sent to us, and so we put together a package and we sent back this picture. Here he is wearing a handbook just for fun, just kind of being silly. Okay, and here I am on one of my Hello Friends trips. Here are the little kids. They all love having their picture taken, and even in Seoul, even if they don't speak a lot of English, and they'll see you on the street and they'll say, "Hello, hello, hello." They're always, "Hello, hello," and that's obviously the first word that they learn, and it's just a lot of fun. So, a word to business, you probably recognize some of these names: LG, Samsung, Hyundai, obviously. There were some of the big ones. During the years where Park Chung-hee was in power, he created what is called a chaebol, which means business association. But what it is a family-owned conglomerate of lots of companies together, and he modeled them after a Japanese system known as zaibatsu. However, there was one difference. The zaibatsu had been organized around banks, but in Korea, the companies weren't allowed to own banks because Park Chung-hee had nationalized all of them. So he was able to dole out money and finances when he felt that it would benefit the economy. So as a consequence, some of them grew very large and wealthy, and then if there were to be an economic downturn, they didn't fare so well because they were artificially healthy. I'm sure they're probably all pretty healthy today. I didn't look at all the statistics. But anyway, it's just an interesting concept of the chaebol, and they're very, very powerful, and they're usually dynasties where the son or daughter will inherit and keep on going down. Again, I mentioned that Korea is the world's 13th largest economy and our 7th largest trading partner. I think it's our 6th largest recipient as far as agricultural goods, and 5th largest for high-tech products. And interestingly enough, as far as tourist dollars or tourist money coming into the U.S., South Korea would rank 5th in the world for the tourist dollars coming into the United States. That's a lot of money when you consider the country has 50 million people and not that big compared with other countries. Energy-wise, Korea really has no oil reserves. It's completely dependent upon imports, and it's the 2nd largest importer of liquefied natural gas in the world. There is wind power that they're harnessing now. You can imagine coming from the west, the tremendous wind power off of the sea, and there is some nuclear power, but they're trying to get away from that, but largely an energy-dependent country. So if you were to go outside of Seoul, just get out of that city and go, you could go to the green tea plantations of Bosung. This is absolutely beautiful. You're miles away from all of the high-rises and the traffic, and this is a very popular tourist destination where you can, again, have the tea, or you can watch the tea leaves being picked. You can watch a traditional, now here you see these ladies wearing the hanbok, but again, this would be for the tourist industry, and they are performing a traditional tea ceremony. That would be Bosung. You could go to Damyang, which has bamboo forests, and you learn all about how some of the seeds and some of the shoots, before we think of bamboo as being very hard, but there are some varieties that can be eaten. But then even the stands that we know can be used for anything from fishing poles to furniture to this to that. And so here they've got, I think, what did they have back here? A garden without bamboo is like a day without sunshine. That's a cute phrase. So the Damyang Forest. Soraksan is on the east coast. It's another one of the national parks. It's absolutely gorgeous. We had the good fortune to go camping there twice with our son's Boy Scout troop, American Boy Scout troop from the Army post. Those were wonderful outings. And right next to Soraksan, well, just a little ways down on the east side, is unbelievably this museum dedicated to Thomas Edison. He never went to Korea, but somebody there is fascinated and has collected. It's supposed to be the third largest in the world with anything to do with Thomas Edison, the Chamsori. And that was just too good to pass up. We had to go have a look at that. And they also have a very beautiful collection of gramophones. So the Chamsori Museum. This would be, there are two big holidays in Korea. This would be Chuseok, or the Thanksgiving, or the harvest, which is in the fall. And this is rather elaborate. Again, I'm not going to say that all families dress this way. This may also have been for the tourist trade, but this would be Chuseok. And I think I always say this is one time when you might not want to travel, because during Chuseok, all the families come together, just like we hopefully will next week for Thanksgiving. But this is what, actually it's unfair to depict this as being Chuseok, because this could be theoretically Seoul on any given weekend, right? But the whole country can come to a standstill. So you might not want to drive at that time, or you should take a bus or a train where you can sit there with a book and be more comfortable. They also celebrate the Lunar New Year. This would be 2018, a card wishing Happy New Year. It's probably, I'm not sure, probably the year of the dog. And it follows the Chinese calendar with the various figures and the various attributes. And it's, it's always a lot of fun to look up your horoscope if you're with a group of people and read like which sign is compatible, which other sign, and things like that. So the Lunar New Year and Chuseok are two really very big holidays in South Korea. Okay, you could go take a look at Pyeongchang, where the Olympics were held. It was already a ski area before the Olympics were held there, but obviously they built on that. And energy poor as it is, South Korea decided not to put a roof on the main stadium, and it was very it had some heating, but not very much. I don't know if you can remember back watching those athletes with the breath coming from their mouths as they paraded through the stadium. Now, I heard, I don't know if this is true, that they might take down this and put up a museum commemorating the Olympic Games. I'm not sure. But at any rate, this would be Pyeongchang, where 2018, the world was looking at the Winter Olympics there. And then you can go out to the temples, the Buddhist temples, which are all in the up in the mountains, in the greenery, some in the cities. But anyway, they're just very beautiful. And in 2002, Korea co-hosted the World Cup soccer games with Japan. Half were in Korea, half were in Japan. And there was one order of Korean Buddhism that decided to try and start a cultural program. So what they did was try something called a temple stay. And a temple stay was where they invited people to come and stay for 1 or 2 nights with the monks in the temple. And it was enormously successful. They had, I think the games only lasted about a month, but they had 1,000 foreigners and 10,000 Koreans take part in this temple stay. And it was so successful that it has been carried forward. And this is something that you can do now. I think these days you might even book online to go stay at a temple. But it's a fabulous combination of culture and heritage and religion, although you don't have to be Buddhist. You do, I have heard, have to be ready to get up at 3 or 4 in the morning to start to pray with the monks. And you, when you receive your bowl of rice, you learn to eat every last grain, to be thankful for every last grain. And then there are different programs. But the temple stay has been praised and is very popular now with tourists. So these would be a wood carving inside one of the temples. Always these same colors, the red, the green, and the blue is consistent. This would be outside in the wintertime. And then again, you've got Buddha over here. Okay, so I'm almost done, but I'm going all the way down to the southern coast, and I'm showing you these houses here. And this is the town of Namhae. And actually, these houses don't look like they belong in Korea. They look like they might belong in Germany. So you have to know that in 1883, Prussia signed already a treaty of friendship with the Chosen dynasty. And this stayed in effect all the way through, even through the Japanese occupation. So Korea and Japan have always been, Korea and Germany have always had a close relationship. We were there in 2008 when they celebrated their 125th year of diplomatic ties, and the German ambassador had a big spread and a big 125 made out of ice. But what this refers to is in the 1960s, when Korea was still very, very poor, and Germany's economic miracle was going, those engines were turning, the Marshall Plan had kicked in, and they needed manpower. So Korea sent coal miners to work in the mines of the Ruhr, which is north of Cologne and Dusseldorf, up on the Rhine River. There's actually a museum there. I haven't seen it, but I'd like to, for the Korean coal miners. And this went on for about 14 years, and there was a tremendous amount of hard currency that came back to Korea for this labor. Also, there were women who went over and who worked as nurses. And so when they came back, they wanted houses in the style that they had remembered, and these houses were built. So this is known as the German Village. Many people go there thinking that they're going to see Germans. They're not going to see Germans. And on top of this, you're talking about people who were working in the 1960s and 70s, so many of them are elderly. Many of them have started to pass away. But this is the German Village down in Namhae. And here they obviously are celebrating. I mean, in Germany, you would really only see this in the south, but people tend to see it as German, and it looks like an Oktoberfest kind of celebration. So that's the German Village. And then this is just a quick tribute to Busan, which is the second largest city and a major port in Korea. And just at the very end, a picture of Jeju Island again off the southern coast, and the quote, Hawaii, unquote, of Korea. And that's how I'm finishing my talk, so I hope you enjoyed it. So yeah. So if you have any questions, criticisms, comments, I'm open.
Is Jeju in the foreground, or is it that bump in the back?
That's a good question. No, it looks like more like the foreground, doesn't it? I don't really know what the back is. I just picked that picture at the end. I've never been asked that question. Actually, I'm not really here to promote books, but there's an interesting thing on Jeju Island. There are women who have been diving there for many, many years, and they harvest the riches of the sea, the abalone, the shells, and they bring them up. And there's a book that just came out by a woman named Lisa C., and it's a historical fiction. It takes you through the Second World War, the Japanese occupation, but it teaches you all about these women who can stay underwater for over 2 minutes. Their lung capacity is just, and this is really true. And at the very end of the book, they have some American scientists who come over to actually study these women or talk with them and find out about them, because this is just such an incredible feat that they do. That is a typical example of a society where the daughters don't necessarily want to do anymore what the mothers did as modernization takes place, but it's very unique. So speaking of Jeju Island, so yeah. Mm-hmm.
So to avoid all this traffic, visit Seoul, what's the best time of year to go, and what's the best way to get around?
Well, obviously there's always going to be heavy traffic in the city of Seoul, but it has excellent subway system. The subways would be impervious to what goes on above them. But I mean, even if you're up there in a Seoul City bus tour or you're walking a stretch, and as far as traveling on the peninsula, I would say again a train or a bus. Even in bus, you're stuck in traffic, but you can read, so something like that, right? Yeah, I don't know how many tourists go to Korea for a week or two and start driving right away. You can bike along the Han River, and there are pretty bike paths down there, but through the city, to me, it's pretty dense traffic. You probably wouldn't be biking through the city but you can bike along the river. I have been told that there's actually a route that goes from Seoul all the way down to Busan, a biking route through the countryside. So that might be something to look into. But in the major city proper itself, I probably wouldn't do it. So, where is it? You mean what part of Korea, or? Oh, I would have to look that up. I wouldn't know exactly what town their headquarters are in. Forgive me. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Can I ask you to walk past from, because you can't see.
Oh, you can't see all my layers of hanbok that I have on here. You're right. I didn't think of that. I suppose I should have stood here. I apologize for that. So, it's there are some hooks back there, but there's no zipper, no button, nothing like that. And
Has the flag always been representative of South Korea, the flag? I see it's so impressive. Or is that something that just came into play like in the 50s?
I don't know. Well, obviously, it cannot go past 1900 because that was the Chosen dynasty. So, my guess might be after the division of Korea because it's the flag of South Korea. I would have to research it to give an exact date, but that would be my educated guess. So after 1953, when the two countries were officially divided, and they have two very, very different flags. So that's my guess.
With so many people there, what kind of occupation?
Well, it's a regular. I mean, what kind of occupation? That's a pretty. I mean, just everything. They're very education oriented, I should say. If your child doesn't go to university, that's considered a failure, and they're trying to get away from that. They're trying to look at another country, say Germany, where to learn a trade, such as electrician or woodworker, and learn it well, can also be honorable, and you can learn a good living. But they are very, very education oriented. The kids go to school, and then they go to tutors after school. So they go school after school, and but as far as occupations, it's really just the same that we have here, pretty much. Yeah.
Do they have a large Korean population here, and do they have Korean restaurants?
Well, I think you in northern Detroit have a couple. I don't know the names, but I've just heard that. And Ann Arbor has 2 or 3. Do you know of a good Korean restaurant? No? There are some, right. I did go to one once that looks like absolutely nothing. It's just a building on US 12, and it's where the Hyundai workers eat lunch. And you go in, and there's no decoration, but it's got to be the real thing if they're eating lunch there. But I know that the northern suburbs have a couple up here. I just don't know what they are. So.
Incheon in Southfield.
Ah, okay. Thank you. There's one. Jinji is the name of it? All right. Okay, so there's a good start right there. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Our neighbors are from Korea. They've only been here a couple of years, and she took her kids this summer, to visit family, and she said the air quality is terrible. When she came home, she said, "Oh, it's so nice and fresh."
They have trouble, yeah. I know, but they have, worse than that, they have yellow dust coming over from China. So you will see a lot of people in public wearing masks. So when the yellow dust comes over, at least there are warnings, and you're discouraged from doing a lot of things outside. Of course, sometimes you can't help moving around outside, but that probably adds to it. Yes. Yeah.
Is that during a particular time of the year, the yellow dust?
Well, I remember the yellow dust in the springtime, but it might be at other times also. I don't know. Right. Yeah, that's true. You wouldn't want it then, would you? No. I know in Beijing there's in Seoul too. There's a yellow dust index of. But I thought it was funny because last year the U.S. Embassy index in Beijing was different from the city index of Beijing as far as their yellow dust index. So who are you going to believe, the city of Beijing or the U.S. Embassy? You can think about that. So anyway, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
I have a friend from Korea in ancestry. She said there is a Korean grocery store off of big called Hedge Mart.
Ah, Hedge Mart. Okay.
I have been to that Hedge Mart in Baltimore when my son was there.
Oh, really?
Really nice stores.
Oh,
There they do,
a good selection. Right. Okay, so 2 tips there, the restaurant and Hedge Mart.
You also showed that snack that with your children, you were going to restaurant and one silkworm.
The boiled pupa, the silkworm pupa. Pupa.
Is it the real silkworm? Because I'm from India and then we have a lot of textiles from pure silkworms that a lot of sarees and all they make.
Oh, you mean those we were always told that they're silkworms and that
Use it for making silk textiles.
yes, that's true. Korea does export a lot of textiles. I have a girlfriend who has a quilt shop in they're not all silk, but she has a quilt shop in Wayne, Michigan, on Michigan Avenue, Bits and Pieces. It's pretty well known in this area, and a huge percentage of her textiles come from Korea because of the vibrancy of the colors. Yeah, I don't know too much about the silk industry. I have to confess. That's an interesting question. What do they do with the silkworms, right? Yes.
A lot of sarees from silk
Mm-hmm.
and India. Then
Yeah.
firms are making the thing that they use that yarn for making silk.
Yes, and that makes sense. That's true. I never thought about that when I saw that. I will have to look into it. Every time I give a talk, somebody asks a question where I go home and read up about it in case someone else asks it again. Yeah, but that's what makes it interesting. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you. Oh, he does. Oh, yeah. Yes. The best time of the year? Well, I wouldn't go in the summertime because even though it's a 4-weather country like we have, the summer have for some reason really tropical drenching rains where you literally think that someone has opened a hole and a bucket has poured on your head. So I wouldn't go in the summer. And then the rest of it is just, I mean, the autumn has gorgeous colors, the autumn and then the springtime. If you like winter sports, the winter, but I would say the autumn or the springtime if I had to make a recommendation. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We have seasons the same time we do.
No, they're the same because we're both north of the equator, so we have the same. We're on the same wavelength as far as that goes. Yes, yeah, that's right. So, well, thank you again.